Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, I have a very special guest, Pete Pardo from the Sea of Tranquility YouTube channel and website. We will be discussing Pete's history in rock journalism, the creation and his involvement in the Sea of Tranquility website, as well as the evolution of his very popular Sea of Tranquility YouTube channel. We will also be discussing the changing media landscape from the pre-internet days through social media to YouTube. Pete, thank you for joining me here again at The Layer.
Thanks for having me, John. Glad
to
be here.
Yes, thank you so much. So, all right, Pete, let's go back. What was the band and the album that ignited the flame and got you into rock and roll?
Kiss Alive.
Okay. Yep.
Kiss Alive. Way back when. So I literally, it's funny. I got into Kiss. I heard that I've probably told this story a lot over the years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. So it was Kiss Alive came out in 75. It was actually 1976. So I was 10 years old. And I had been a fan of music up until then because my parents always had the AM radio on at the house, in the car. So I was a big fan of like AM rock and pop stuff. I mean, I heard it all the time. I had a lot of favorite songs and what have you, but I didn't really get the bug for like heavy music until this particular day. It was on a weekend. My parents had this couple that they were friends with. They were a little bit older than my folks, like 10 or 15 years older. And they had a young daughter who was, I think, maybe 5 or 6 years older than me. So we went over, they invited us over for dinner. So my brother and I, who's 4 years younger than me, and my parents went over there for dinner. After dinner, the folks are just hanging out together and they were like, oh, go do something, kids, to keep yourself occupied. So their daughter said to us, it's like, oh, I got this really cool new album if you guys want to listen to it. And meanwhile, we're like, album? We don't collect albums, whatever. I'm 10 years old. My brother's like 6. So we're like, all right, whatever. So we go up to her room and she puts the record on and she hands me the LP. Wow. And it's these crazy looking guys in costumes and long hair and paint and guitars. And I'm like, holy cow, what is this? And, you hear, you wanted the best, you got the best, the hottest band in the world, Kiss, and Deuce comes on, right? And I'm like, holy cow, right? And I'm open this album up, and at the time, as a 10-year-old, since I was like maybe 4 or 5, I was into comic books, into like monster movies, dinosaurs. I mean, any kind of horror, creature, monster thing, comic book thing, I'm into. I love music, right? But never like latched onto a band per se. So we're listening to Kiss Alive, and I'm like, this is great. It's like, how do I get into this, right? So she's telling me about the Kiss Army and all this kind of stuff. So I go and I'm after, we heading home and I'm telling my parents about this band Kiss and whatnot. And my parents are looking at me like, all right, that sounds a little weird, right? So what do I do? So I'm like, back in the day, I would get like a little allowance from my father every weekend. And, it was nothing, like a quarter or 50 cents or whatever it was back in the day. So I was like, I got to get that Kiss album. So I started saving up my money for like, a month or 2 or whatever it was. And finally I had enough money. So I had my parents take me to the local, I think I bought it at like White's or White's, Caldor's, Plate, I don't know, wherever I got it, I forget the store. And we went to the store and they didn't have it in stock. However, apparently the band had released this brand new album called Destroyer. Wow. It had just come out. So for my $4.99 or whatever it was, I bought Destroyer because that's what they had. And I loved it, obviously. And then it was my goal that I had to go out and get every Kiss album I can get my hands on. And I saved up I did extra chores around the house, whatever I could do to save up money to get Kiss albums. So the next one I got was, of course, Kiss Alive. Then I bought the Platinum Kiss Double Platinum, which had like all the early albums on it. And then eventually I found out that was just, I need to get the individual albums. So I did that. Then Kiss Alive 2 came out. Then Love Gun came out, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, that was what got me into like heavier music. But at the same time, I was also, getting into The Who and Yes and Genesis and Kansas and Boston. The first Boston album came out. I fell in love with that. Meatloaf, Bat Out of Hell, Paul McCartney and Wings, the Eagles, ELO, Electric Light Orchestra. So that's kind of what I was listening to at the time. And then, as the 70s wore on and we got on, about 1979 or so, Kiss is starting to fade a little bit from the public eye. The Dynasty album comes out, and, us Kiss fans are not as much into that album, but I still consider myself a fan. And then one day, that fateful day, because everybody's got one of those fateful days, a friend of mine invites me over to his house, and, my parents dropped me off over there, whatever. And he goes, "You got to check out this album that I bought at my parents went to we went to a flea market the other day, and I bought this from some guy at the flea market." I'm like, "All right, cool." And he pulls it out, and it's got this picture of this soldier guy on the front, and it's by a band called Black Sabbath, Paranoid. And he puts that on, and I'm like, wow, this is heavier than Kiss. This is darker than Kiss. I love that guitar tone. What is this? And that album, as much as Kiss like kind of changed my life, Black Sabbath, Paranoid, there was no looking back after that. None. I did whatever I could over the next couple of weeks to be able to trade that album from him for, I don't even remember what I gave him for it, but I had to have that. And I did. And that was my absolute starting point for, some people call Kiss metal, the early stuff. I don't know. Kiss is just a great hard rock band, but Black Sabbath was my introduction to what we, now call heavy metal, obviously. And that turned me on to Deep Purple. Those are my two favorite bands of all time, Deep Purple and Black Sabbath. Led Zeppelin. Then I started listening to Judas Priest and Rainbow and the Scorpions and Iron Maiden. And before you know it, we're already into the 80s and all that kind of stuff. And there was no turning back. And then, Metallica comes out, and I'm getting into Motorhead and Slayer and Exodus and Megadeth and thrash. And, and then when the 90s came around, all of a sudden, like, metal's going into the underground, and you've got like alternative rock and grunge and hip hop and all that kind of stuff. And I I got kind of disenchanted with metal because, a lot of metal bands were trying to change their sound to get in with the times, or they were going completely underground. And I just discovered progressive rock in a big way. Like, I mean, I was already listening to Rush, and I was already listening to little bits of Yes and Genesis and Kansas and what have you. But man, I just discovered all this other stuff, and I became an enormous progressive rock fan in the 90s, as well as like jazz and jazz fusion. So I started to really get into all this different stuff, and wasn't listening to a ton of metal in the 90s other than like, say, like Dream Theater, which is progressive metal. I was huge into Dream Theater. And then I didn't really get back into metal until like the early 2000s. And then I discovered extreme metal. So I started listening to death and black metal and Opeth and, all that other kind of stuff. And then I just, before you know it, like metal is big again, and you've got progressive metal and power metal, technical metal, I mean, all this kind of stuff. And there's so much music out there to explore. So, I mean, now here we are all these years later. And I mean, I've got a CD collection that's bordering on like 10,000, and
Oh, wow.
I love it. I love so many bands, and it's hard for me. People ask me all the time, "So, what's your favorite bands and favorite genres?" It's like, well, I can tell you some of my favorite bands. As far as favorite genres, I love so much stuff. It's hard to say. Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Whitesnake, Uriah Heep, Dream Theater, Symphony X, Kansas, Genesis, Yes, Jethro Tull. I mean, The Who, Rolling Stones. I mean, Opeth. I mean, there's so many bands that I love. Wishbone Ash. I mean, we could sit and talk all day, but I think I've just grown to appreciate so much music and so many bands, and to the point where I'm just thinking about like music all day long. Even like when I'm doing something that's not music related, there's music going on in my head, and
I
I
know
just
what you mean.
I mean, that's my calling, I guess. Like, and you sometimes you realize that later in life. You just think you're like everybody else. I mean, there's some people that like music more than others. There's some people music is just a cool background thing. Yeah, you put it on the car, you put the radio on, whatever. I don't know who sings that song. I don't know what album it is. I just know I like the song. A lot of people think that way. I'm not wired that way. For me, it's like if I like a band, I want to own all the albums. I want to know what year
Yeah.
each album was released in. I like to know who produced the album. I want to know what the lineup is on the album, who played guitar on that album, who played keyboards on that album. I investigate like the tours they played and which songs they played on each tour. All these little intricate things that the general public doesn't care about are really important to me. So I just started to kind of develop this it's weird. It's almost like an encyclopedic mind for the little intricacies about music that I think a lot of people just, they don't even think twice about. It's just not important. To me, it's part of the whole thing. It's like, like if you're passionate about something, you want to know everything that's possible about that thing that you love. And that's the way I am with music. And it's just become such a driving force in my life for so long that it's just, and it continues. The older I'm getting, the more it just even more important. And I never thought I'd say that, but it's just a complete passion. And I guess the next part we'll talk about is how I started doing all this stuff. And when I look back in my life, this was the way it was always destined to be, I guess, in a weird way.
And so it's that passion and knowledge for music then so how when did that turn into the journalism, the music, like covering music, the doing the reviews and stuff like that? Was that with Sea of Tranquility, or were you doing that before the website, or were you doing that stuff before the website?
Yeah, I was doing it a little bit before. So I guess, in the 90s, there was this whole like kind of new wave of progressive rock. So of course, the glory days of prog was in the 70s. And then in the 80s, you had a lot of British bands and other international bands who were kind of still doing the prog thing. But in the 90s, in the early 90s, prog started to explode again on an international level, or from all different countries in the world. And that's when I really started to get back into it again. And there was like this community. And then the internet came. It's sometimes it's hard to wrap my brain around when a life before the internet, but all of a sudden the internet's here and there's these websites. I still remember like when I first got the internet, I was like, oh my God, Gentle Giant has a website, and you go on the website and you see all these cool like live pictures of them from the 70s. Like, ooh, you're like a little kid in a candy store, right? And then, before you know it, which is a natural extension, before we used to read magazines.
Yeah.
There were actual, I read Kerrang and Metal Hammer and Cream and Circus and Hit Parade, all that stuff. I was a like hard rock and metal magazine junkie. And then all of a sudden, like in the late 90s, you had these kind of like progressive rock review sites popping up, right? And I don't know, I'd never written anything before. Never. I mean, I went to college and I was a TV and radio broadcasting major, so I had these aspirations of working in television and all that kind of stuff. Which, after graduating and trying to do it for a couple of years, I wound up getting into sales, and I wasn't utilizing that part at all. So I guess that something about writing about progressive rock music, or even progressive metal, kind of intrigued me. So I wound up like reading this website called Prognet. And this was basically like an open forum type of a website. There were a lot of these back in the day where anybody could contribute reviews of albums and discuss, albums and bands in an open forum type of thing. So I started doing that. So I did that for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And I was just writing reviews for the Prognet forum alongside bunch of other people, and we all got to, know each other through the website. And then there was this prog rock magazine called Progression Magazine, which was one of the most popular prog rock print magazines out there. And I was a subscriber to that magazine, and I saw an ad in one of the issues that said, we're looking for writers, right? So I was like, I could be interested in that. I love this magazine. I'm digging writing this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking that would be kind of cool. So they gave like an email address to send an email into to apply for it or whatever. So I sent an email into that email address, explain who I was and that I was writing for Prognet, and I have a long history with listening to the genre and all that kind of stuff. And I get a response back from a guy named James Bickers, who was one of the, I don't know what his title was at Progression Magazine, but he wrote for the magazine, but there was a like progressive metal section of Progression Magazine. So there was a part of the magazine that just basically had reviews and interviews with progressive metal artists and bands. So he's like, yeah, I got your email. He goes, I like the samples you sent and all that kind of stuff. He goes, but let me ask you a question. He goes, I'm looking to spin off my own magazine called Sea of Tranquility. Would you be interested in writing for me? And I won't even tell John, the editor, of her that you sent this in, and you could just start over there with me. And I was like, part of me was like, but I don't know it. I don't know the Sea of Tranquility thing at all, right? It didn't exist. I was like, I kind of wanted to write, but I was like, you know what? I'll give it a chance, right? So I said, sure, I'll do that. So he brought me on board. I don't know. We had like maybe 6 or 7 writers, I think, at the time, and I still have the old issues, by the way. So the Sea of Tranquility was a quarterly color and black and white magazine, subscription only, and we were available in some of the like Borders Music, and I think Barnes and Noble used to sell us as well. But it was basically geared towards progressive metal. All right. So I started with the magazine, and basically I was reviewing CDs and doing the occasional interview, which was pretty cool. Back in those days, you did an interview, you did it over the phone, you recorded it on your little handheld
Yeah.
tape recorder, then you had to play it back and type it, stop, start, rewind, start. It was the worst thing ever. But that's how it started. So I did that for about, I guess, a year and a half or so. And then, we had, I don't know how, we had like about 500 subscribers, I think. So, and, it was a lot of work to put the magazine together, but James was really into it. And then one day he comes to me and he says, some new stuff happening today. And I said, well, what's going on? He goes, I had a discussion with John, the publisher of Progression magazine. And we worked out a deal where the Sea of Tranquility magazine would no longer exist. Because we kind of conflict and there's, kind of some competition going there. So I agreed to sell off the magazine to John. We're going to incorporate Sea of Tranquility into a larger section of Progression magazine, not called Sea of Tranquility anymore. I forget what it was called, the dark pages, something like that. And he goes, but as part of our agreement, we could take Sea of Tranquility to the internet and start up a website. So he asked me, he's like, so if you want, you can go off to Progression magazine and be part of his staff. Or if you want to stick around, we're going to do the same, what we're doing here, but we're doing it all on the web. So I was like, James, I'm going to stick with you. So that's what we did. So we launched Sea of Tranquility in 2000. Pretty archaic looking. It doesn't look great today either, but we revamped it like 2 years later. But yeah, that's what we did. And like a year later, not even a year later, I don't think, it was October of 2001. James comes to me one day and he says, oh, give me a call when you get a chance. It's like, okay. So I called him up and he goes, so my wife and I are expecting our first baby. We just found out. He goes, and I just got a new job at this radio station. I've been looking to get a job at this radio station for a while. He says, so I'm going to have my hands full. And I really don't think that I can kind of do this anymore, run this whole website thing and all that kind of stuff. He goes, I see in you a lot of passion for this, and I think you might be the right guy to take this over. So if you're interested, I will just hand the reins over to you and step aside, and it's your baby going forward. And, I looked at my now wife, but then girlfriend, and I'm like, think I can do this? I don't know nothing about running a website, right? And she goes, I think you can do it. Give it a try, right? So I was like, all right, screw it. So I'm going to do it. So I said yes. A couple of the writers stayed with me. The rest, went their separate ways. And we started fresh. I brought in a couple new writers. We eventually, like about not even a year later, we revamped the website. One of my good friends is a software developer, and he helped revamp the whole thing. And, within like 2 years, I had like 25 writers from around the world. I had I had all the record labels contacting me, wanting us to review their artists and interview their artists. And, within a couple of years, we were like one of the only websites out there kind of dealing with progressive rock, progressive metal, power metal, death metal, thrash metal, all this different stuff, classic rock. We were covering all these different genres. We had thousands of reviews. I had all these writers from all over the world, and it was pretty cool. And everybody knew who we were. I was getting I can't tell you how many times over the years in the 2000s where, a record label would come to me and say, hey, Pete, Behemoth and Dimmu Borgir are playing at such and such in New York City. Would you like a couple of guest passes and photo passes to go cover the show, take some pictures and write a show review and maybe interview the band backstage? And I'm like, okay. So like every week I was going into New York City and, hobnobbing with the bands in the photo pit, and it was great. It was pretty cool. I mean, it was pretty fast paced, but it was a lot of fun. But nothing lasts forever, right? So probably about, I don't know, about 2010, I would say, I started to notice like a lot of these type of websites like ours were going by the wayside. We're like just disappearing and whatnot. And I think people started to have a fascination for watching video. And instead of going onto a website and reading a couple paragraphs of a review of an album or reading a 1,000-word
Yeah.
interview with a band, they would rather go onto a place like YouTube and watch someone talk about an album or watch someone interview someone, that sort of thing. So I was kind of like, and again, sometimes I'm a little hesitant to change. Like, the older I'm getting, the more I'm kind of like, well, change is not easy, right? But eventually, and it was in 2014 actually, um, where I said, you know what, I'm gonna try this. It can't hurt, right? I mean, I'll give it a try. If it doesn't work, I'll just continue doing what I'm doing. So I started a YouTube channel, Sea of Tranquility, and I remember I remember those first videos, like, and I even recently went and watched a couple of them and I cringed. I mean, it's just like, and I have a background in broadcasting, so this should have been a no-brainer for me from the beginning. But again, I hadn't done it in a million years.
And the
So
technology, yeah,
yeah,
it's
the
changed so
technology
much.
and how to present yourself on camera and just be yourself. So I remember the first like year is just me kind of sitting here in front of the camera, and I remember I would sit in the middle of the room, this exact same office,
Yeah.
right? And like, bad lighting, bad camera angles, bad microphone, monotone voice. And I'd just be like, okay, so today we're going to talk about the new Epitaph CD called such and such. Yeah, and I'd name a couple tracks, whatever, and every episode would be like 3-4 minutes, and I'd be like, okay, whatever. And like nobody was watching it. And I was thinking, but I got all these people who come to the website, but yet they won't come to the YouTube channel. I'm like, why is that? Right. And I just couldn't understand it. And until like maybe a year into it, I started to kind of come out of my shell a little bit. And I think, and again, video is very different from kind of the written
Oh yeah.
word type of thing, as you probably know. I mean, you can, your personality does not really come out on, on a traditional website that's just got text. It is what it is, right? People read it and then they move on to something else. And on video, especially on YouTube, it's like people have to feel a connection with you.
Yeah.
And if you're not engaging to your audience, they're not going to feel that connection. They're not going to come back and watch your videos, right? So, and I don't remember who I had the conversation with. It might have been my wife. I don't remember. And she's like, in person, you're such an engaging person to be around. And people love to be in conversations with you. People love to listen to you. You're a good listener. Just do that on the YouTube channel, because you should know how to do that already, because I mean, that's what I went to college for. That's what I studied for. That was going to originally be my career, right? It didn't quite happen that way. And I said, all right, well, what can I do that's going to help kind of bring me out of my shell? So I said, you know what? Just doing these little review shows is all fine and dandy, because that's the most important thing to me anyway. It's promoting the bands, promoting these albums, and turning people onto music and bands they may not have found on their own. That was always the mission of Sea of Tranquility. Website, YouTube channel, whatever. It's to, if you haven't heard this album, here's why you should seek it out, right? And that sort of thing. So I started doing like different types of programs. I started doing like ranking the albums, right? So taking a look at catalogs from classic bands, new bands, and looking at their discography and just getting into a general conversation. Here's how I rank these albums from maybe least favorite to favorite. But how would you rank these, Mr. or Mrs. Viewer, right? I started doing like top 10 song shows where I would pick a band and here are my 10 favorite tracks. What are your 10 favorite tracks? List them in the comments of the video below. I would start doing like I did like these short series where I would look at like favorite album releases year by year by year. I started interviewing musicians and bands on here. But I think the most important thing is that I started to, it's not like I just am talking to an audience and then boop, I'm gone, right? And it was never about kind of what I have to say. It was always about I'm the guy that's going to start the conversation, but I want everybody to give some thought into what the topic is and then add that in the comments below. So the comments section of every video became like a forum for this
Yeah.
Sea of Tranquility community. And before you know it, I started like it just kind of like started. Would start to see, I went from having like no comments on any of the videos to like 50 and 100. And all of a sudden the views, I'm getting like 1,000 views per video, 2,000 views per video. All of a sudden, and back in the day when I first started the channel, I used to sign up for the email alerts every time I got a comment on any video, and I would hardly get anything. Before you know it, my inbox is full, and I'm like, what is going on here, right? And I'm starting to get more and more people watching, but more importantly, more and more people contributing and loving being part of this kind of back and forth interaction, which became more than just some guy on a YouTube video screen talking at you and that's it, right? And then, you know, we've had, and as well as anybody, we've had over the last 5 years or so, a lot of deaths in the rock community. Some
Yeah.
legendary figures have passed away. And I started doing these kind of like just tribute videos to our fallen heroes, because I feel I'm a fan first and foremost. Again, I never did this to become famous or anything like that. I'm a fan. I'm as big a music geek as anybody else. And that's why I do this, because I love it. I started doing these tribute videos to our fallen rock stars. And I try to do them as soon as the news breaks. In some cases, I'm as crushed as anybody else, and sometimes they're hard to do. But it's some people like, I can't tell you how many people like, Pete, if it wasn't for your video, I would have never known till days later that my
Yeah.
favorite guitar player died, my favorite singer died, because not everybody's paying attention to all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying as best I can to bring newsworthy things that I think are important to our viewership in a timely fashion, so we can all kind of share in that. And before you know it, I got to 1,000 subscribers. And then like before you knew it, I got to 5 and then 10 and 20. And I'm like almost at 60. And, I get like 1,000,000+ views a month and 200,000 unique visitors a month. And it's kind of hard to believe, right? And I'm just like, and it's amazing how quickly I've gotten here. But I will say it's a lot of work. If anybody who is watching thinks that you can just go start up a YouTube channel and immediately, have thousands of subscribers and visitors and make all sorts of money, it doesn't work that way. I'm telling you right now, it does not work that way. It's taken me 7 years to get to where I am now, just about 7 years. It'll be 7 years in September. And you gotta really work at it. And people, and John, you probably know as well as I do, people are very fickle. They may love you today, but if they don't see you for a week, they've already moved on to 5 other
Yeah.
channels. So you have to build up that loyal subscribership who want to come back every day, who wait to come back every day. And I think one of the cool things for me, because I'm a people person, is seeing like all these familiar faces in the comments all the time. And
Yeah.
people just loving and not everybody loves everything. There are people who love some of the things I say and don't love some of the things I say. And that's fine. I always tell everybody, if you think you're going to absolutely agree and love 100% of what comes out of my mouth, you're not being realistic. But that's okay, because we all like and dislike different things. We all have our opinions and stuff. I always try to be fair about everything I talk about. And again, I'm just a fan. And I think that when it comes down to it, I love talking about the bands and the music that I love, that I have a passion for, because I know there's a lot of people like me out there, and
Yeah.
it's this community thing that, I follow a lot of different channels. I do. And I like a lot of them for various different reasons. I don't know, and I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, because I didn't put them there, but a lot of the people, the thousands of them that frequent my videos and watch them and participate in the discussion in the comments section, it really warms my heart because it is a true community. You got people who know each other, and then they go and they friend each other on Facebook, and you see the
Yeah.
conversation there. And it's like, and there's all these cool personalities and very knowledgeable people out there who, I mean, I see some wonderful comments from, and it's like, it's amazing to me. And it just goes to show that you know what, maybe I'm doing something right. And maybe all the hard work and dedication and love I put, because it's a labor of love. It's absolutely what it is. What I'm putting into it has moved a lot of people. And I can't tell you how many people have said, you know, Pete, I don't know what I would have done without you. You're here for us every day since COVID started. It's been a terrible year for us,
Yeah.
but without you, I don't know what I do. And I mean, that really humbles me and makes me feel good. And, and that's why I try to bring people content each and every day, sometimes multiple times a day. I mean, I won't lie. I'm sitting in this office 7 o'clock in the morning doing content or getting ready for content. I work a full-time job from 9 to 5. That's not, has nothing to do with this. And then I'm sitting in this chair every night till like 10 o'clock, 10:30 at night. So I'm putting in an enormous day, you know, at least Monday through Friday, or at least Monday through Thursday. But it's worth it because I know it means something to me. And if I'm making people happy out there and they're getting something out of it, and the bands appreciate it too. That again, as much as I want to do this for the viewers to help enrich their lives with music awareness and or even just reminiscing about stuff they love, the bands appreciate it because a lot of them, especially, and you know, today's day and age, it's really hard
Yeah.
for newer bands to get noticed, for older bands to get their new music noticed. I mean, all that kind of stuff for, you know, bands who aren't around anymore to have people kind of go and revisit old catalogs and all that kind of stuff. I do this for it's not really for myself. I do this for everybody involved, viewers, bands, the labels, all that kind of thing. And yeah, it's just, you know, and I think where I'm working towards at some point is I want Sea of Tranquility to be like a true like TV station. I'm gonna, you know, just, and I've already set the stage for it. It's like I have all these different types of shows and different types
Yeah.
of programming, and you know, someday, if I can ever do this, you know, full time, you're gonna see Monday through Friday and maybe 7 days a week. Every day you're going to get different types of programming. Here's the slots where it's going to be on, and that's how it's going to be. And that's where I'm working towards. So I think I've set the stage for that over the last couple of years, especially, and it's keeping me busy. But I love what I do, and that's the important thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would love that TV channel idea. That's fantastic. That would be great. And it is your passion and knowledge and everything that's what really comes through on your videos, and it's infectious. And like you mentioned, the community thing. You know, you mentioned about getting your early days of getting on the internet, and I had the same reaction. I got on, and I remember thinking like, I only knew one other kid at my high school that was into Black Sabbath as much as I was. So I always thought they were just like this sort of underground band that only a couple people liked. Well, then I got on the internet and was like, I found a Joe Sigler's blacksabbath.com site, was like, whoa, there's people on here on a forum like talking endlessly about art, you know, discussing who sang on Solitude or Planet Caravan and who, you know, which Iommi riff is the best. And I was just like absolutely blown away. And it created a sense of community. And I remember very fondly, like sort of the late 90s when forums were very big, you know, and you would get on there and just geek out and get people just going Sabbath fans or whatever it was, you know, just deep diving and just having these great conversations with people. And then social media came around with MySpace and Facebook, and I think that took away from the forums. You know, the forums then weren't quite as popular, and I really missed that. And now I think with YouTube, and you just talked about that I think now that this is where the community is. And like you said, somebody like your channel, you're very engaging. It feels like you get to know the person, you know, and you look forward to this person's videos. You start to recognize other people in the comments section, and it just becomes this really enjoyable, engaging thing. So, and like you said, with everything going on now in the world, it's it's even more so now, and it brings people together, and it's a really great thing to see. And rock and roll and hard rock and heavy metal, it's sort of at this point in history too, where there's lots of new great stuff coming out, but there's so much stuff from the past that you can also sit back and talk about and look back on and reflect on and enjoy, and new bands too, and all this other stuff. So there's just so much to talk about.
Yeah,
There's
there
so much
is.
to enjoy, and I get a kick out of in the comment section when I have people. I just did yes 90125, and somebody commented on there like they were at Castle Donington 84 when they heard they played this album over the PA system. That was the first time they heard it. Another guy was talking about how he saw I had a Blue Oyster Cult, On Your Feet on Your Knees, legendary live, and a guy commented like how he saw Blue Oyster Cult in like 75 or something like that on that tour and stuff, or they talk about, I used to have that on 8-track, or I love that. I love hearing people's stories. I find it so interesting, especially when people have these stories from back in the day. They saw Rush on the 2112 tour, or just all of it is great, and I love listening to people talk about things, and your channel too, your stories, your experiences with it. And even if you don't completely agree with the person, it's just interesting to hear that person's side of it. It's when someone like you is passionate about it, it comes through. It gets me excited. Your channel has turned me on to a lot of different things. Gentle Giant, you mentioned Gentle Giant earlier. They're one of those bands that somehow I just completely missed them, and it was your channel. And now Octopus, and I did a video on it. And
Awesome.
so it's a great thing. It's a great community. It sort of gives back to itself in a lot of ways, and it's very supportive and just great. So
Yeah, and it's interesting too how sometimes we tend to think that there's not a lot of people like us out there who really care about the music in the way that we do. But then you realize that, like, we're not living in a vacuum here. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people who feel as passionately about these genres as we do. Even though it seems like in normal day-to-day life you really don't meet too many people like that. I mean, I know so many people who their idea of being a music fan is just having the radio on in the background, or they turn on their Sirius XM in the car and it's just on this random shuffle thing, and they're like, whatever. They don't think in terms of albums and all the stuff that's important to us, and that's the masses, right? But there are millions of people who love music in the ways that we do, who have those
yeah,
stories, who have those experiences that they can talk about, when they were in high school and how they listened to all these records and went, and got drunk before the concert to go see X, Y,
yeah,
and Z,
yeah.
or, this is what my wife and I did before we got married, and these are the albums we got into together and all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of people that are like us. And I think that they come out of the woodwork when you have a channel that has that kind of community, which is really cool. And yeah, it's a really fun thing. And one aspect I didn't talk about before, but something that has become increasingly popular on Sea of Tranquility is I've been able to assemble this cast of you know co-captains, I call them, right? So these guest stars that
Yeah.
frequent a lot of the different shows that I do, that, you know, I'll put it to you this way. It's like I could have from the beginning, and I did it for many years, just be the only face you ever see on Sea of Tranquility. And that's all fine and dandy. I could still do that today, but that's not like exciting for me. I love to have someone else on the show sitting beside me, whether it's, in non-COVID times, sitting next to me here in the studio, or on another Zoom window, or two or three or four in the case of the Hudson Valley Squares,
Yeah, a whole
there's like
bunch.
7 or 8 of us, right? And I love having these characters who all bring such unique vision and knowledge and passion for a lot of the same stuff I do, or different things. And, they all have different personalities. I mean, I've got some folks, without naming all of them, like a Martin Popoff or a Chris Allo,
Yeah.
or a Butch Jones, or, Lynn Versace, Sydney Taylor. I mean, Ryan Scow, Nick Franco. I mean, the list goes on and on. I could mention more. There's so many of them. Jack Toledano. I mean, there's just so many guest stars that I have on fairly regularly, who now people look forward to. You know, they know they're going to get me a good chunk of the time by myself, but they love that kind of back and forth, like
Interaction.
sharing of knowledge and enthusiasm, so to speak. So, and again, and managing that again, you know, I talked about the TV station thing before. You know, a big part of running a TV station is talent management, right? So now all of a sudden you're managing schedules and who you're having on what day and what time slot and the calendar. You know, I've got a very cool calendar on my phone that if I didn't have, I wouldn't know what is up any day of the week, right? So whether it's, you know, trying to program my own stuff and who's coming on the show at what time, what are we talking about, you know, and I do lots of guest starring things on other people's channels and radio stations and all that kind of stuff, so trying to fit that in too as well. So, you know, managing all that can be challenging at times, but it's fun. And it's like I'm running my own TV station here in a weird sort of way, but I love it. And as long as people want to continue to watch and listen to me blather on talking about bands that I love and albums that I love, I'll continue doing it because there is no shortage of bands to talk about and albums to talk about. I get, you know, some people every now and then they're like, "Oh, Pete, when do you? I think you as much videos as you pump out, you're going to run out of things to talk about at some point." And I'm like, if you saw my to-do list, you would know that is not the case. I've got stuff lined up for the next X amount of years, and there's no stopping me now. So
Awesome. Well, I all your success. It's well deserved. I really look forward to where you're going to take the channel in the future. So it's really exciting, and I know I speak for all your fans. We really appreciate
thank you, John.
everything you do. So. All right, so thanks, Pete. This was great. You gave us the your history. It's really fascinating. It's really interesting hearing about these early days of the internet and how things evolved over time and with the YouTube channel and everything. So thank you so much for coming to the layer here and sharing your
Thanks
story
for
with
having me.
us. All right, so if for some reason there's anybody out there who doesn't know Pete's channel, I will be leaving a link down below. For some reason you haven't heard of Pete's channel, and this hasn't convinced you, you need to go check out Pete's channel. It's awesome. So there will be a link down below. Thank you again for joining me here at the Layer. And everybody out there, leave some comments down below. Maybe some of your memories of the early days of the internet, the before internet days when we had to look at album covers and imagine what these artists were really like and their stories and everything. And you heard rumors and all this other kind of stuff. Your early days discovering bands and stuff on the internet like Black Sabbath and Gentle Giant for Pete. And then you know, coming here on YouTube, everybody's experiences with all that. So let us know in the comments down below. Thanks again, Pete, and everybody out there. We'll see you next time. And remember to rock hard, ride free.